Joining me now here on the Knicks Film School Podcast, you may have seen him over the weekend representing with his talents down in South Beach at whatever they call MSG South now, when the Knicks were taking on the Miami Heat in games 3 and 4, because he was in enemy territory, doing content. For what we all found is very good content for the Dan Le Batard show with or without Stugotz. And while the Knicks couldn't back him up with some victories and some validation for entering into enemy territory, we appreciate him so much that we had to have him on our show to fully show that appreciation and talk about this basketball team. He is one of the members of the, as they still call it, the shipping container, but he is one of the members of the production crew over at the Dan Le Batard show at Meadowlark Media. And he is Taylor Vippolis. Taylor, welcome to the Knicks Film School Podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here. We were talking before about how we're doing. We both said we're doing good, but then we realized very quickly, no, we could be doing a lot better.
The vibes, as Jalen Brunson put it,
not immaculate.
No longer immaculate. They're immaculate at the moment. They're the opposite of immaculate. So I wanted to get a little backstory on you because you're new to our show, and so our audience might not have a familiarity to your backstory. And so obviously you're a Knicks fan. What's your first Knicks memory? If we could just go back to that very specific point, like the more context I want to provide is like, is this your first, or is the Melo years your first real taste of playoff success? How far back do you go with the Knicks?
Yeah, I was born in 1994. I went to Carolina, and I actually told Hubert Davis this story, that the day I was born, the team was on like a cross-country trip back that kind of got altered, and it was like a big team bonding moment that day. And then they did not lose. I was born March 1st. They did not lose the entire month of March 1994. They go on to the finals that year. But my Knicks memories, so my dad was born in Italy, and my mom is just not a big sports fan, and neither were her parents. So I didn't have anybody who was pushing me to be a Knicks fan. But I grew up right outside the city in Rockland County. And okay. I just immediately kind of fell in love with the Knicks from a pretty young age. I don't really have too many memories of, like, I have zero recollection of the Patrick Ewing, John Stark, even really Allen Houston. I don't really remember those days. The first Knicks team that I can kind of remember are like the Stephon Marbury, Eddie Curry years, Jamal Crawford. The first Knick that I remember truly falling in love with and identifying with was David Lee. And that David Lee, Wilson Chandler, Danilo Gallinari, that team was my kind of introduction into Knicks fandom, and it feels like I haven't missed too many games since.
So molded in the darkness, as we call it, those that became Knicks fans in the mid 2000s. And like, I'm lucky enough that I jumped on around 97, 98, a little older than you. So I have the faintest of memories of those late 90s teams. And then, the lean years of the 2000s, what I consider significant, that Melo season in 2013, but then you get to 2010s, and this season that we've had, it's a 2 out of 3 year run, but really this year felt the most sustainable. You can call whatever you want the weaker season, but I think we all took a step back from that, especially the way they lost to Atlanta, thinking that was a house of cards that was built to fall, and it fell at the hands of Trae Young. And this year, getting to experience a player like Brunson, a regular season player like Randle, and what this team became, to see where we are now is deflating, and it's disappointing. And it's why I think Knicks fans are trying to rectify today their feelings and how to fully talk about what this season's been, especially if it's going to go out this way. Have you gotten there at all yet with processing what this Knicks season has been, and the step forward it is, while realizing that it's also going to end up being not like knocking on wood that it's not over yet technically, but if they are to lose to the Heat, that it ends up just being like another chapter in the Knicks Heat rivalry?
Yeah, if there's a God, if you believe in a higher power, the Knicks will win the next 3 games.
Amen.
I cannot stand being around some of the Miami fans and their delusion and just a general feeling of entitledness. The 2 takes that have kind of stuck with me being around Miami fans and being on the Dan Le Batard show is one person wanted to lose the play-in game against the Bulls because they wanted a better chance of picking Victor Wembanyama, even though it was still like under 2%. And then the other take is them wondering how many more championships they would have won during the Big Three era if instead of LeBron you put Jimmy Butler on the team. So there's a complete lack of self-awareness to realize like Knicks fans, we're just enjoying this moment, and it's a lot for people to stomach at times if you're not from New York and you don't understand what it's like being a New York fan. Like I have zero recollection of Charles Oakley playing in the Garden. My only memory of Charles Oakley is James Dolan kicking him out and kind of making the fan base just not embarrassed to be a Knicks fan, but for the entire time I've been growing up, like the Knicks were the punchline for everybody's joke and such an easy target for everybody. This year, above all else, felt like a stepping stone where the Knicks don't have to be the joke franchise. Jalen Brunson comes in and he kind of puts some credibility to the way that this Knicks team wants to play. It's guys like Josh Hart and Jalen Brunson and Isaiah Hartenstein, where it's like these guys just embody what it means to be a New Yorker and fight with toughness and grit. But it has been disappointing to go down 3-1 to Miami because they beat the Bucks and the 1 seed gets taken out, and all of a sudden you're thinking, oh my God, are we going to the Eastern Conference Finals for the first time since 1999?
And 2000. They got 2000. There and they actually beat the Heat to get to the conference finals.
Down Houston,
2000.
Game 7, yeah. And I think the most disheartening thing about this particular series against the Heat is just that for 16 quarters, the majority of them, the Heat have just looked like the significantly better team. And they're doing it in a lot of ways that this Knicks team did it during the regular season and in that first round series against Cleveland with offensive rebounds and stealing extra possessions and just out hustling you. And I've been to 4 games so far. I've been to 3 games this series out of the 4.
Oh, okay.
And I only missed game 2, so I haven't seen a win yet. And for anybody who
get you to stop going to games, my man.
Yeah, somebody said that. I was like, I think you're the jinx, and I'm like, I'm not the one who's not hustling back on defense. That's Julius Randle.
Right.
Me being in the building has nothing to do with Julius Randle hustling up and down the court, but from the game 3 and game 4 in Miami in particular, like those games just never felt close. Like they might have got it to 5 at some point in the second half in game 4, or maybe even they got it to 3, but it just never felt sustainable and it never felt like they were really in it, or it felt like even if they did get a lead that Miami was just going to find a way to win.
Yeah. So a couple things from what you just said. First of all, as someone who gets the show, I because Jeremy Taché is a friend, so I respect his analysis a lot. He's like behind the scenes, and like I'm sure you're close with Jeremy too. And Jeremy, like we will eventually reconvene and do a podcast together whenever your schedule allows it. So I got no smoke for Jeremy. If you don't know who DeJounte Murray is, I just don't know how much of your basketball opinion is that I respect. So that's just like my 2 cents on that. Shout out 10-Day Tony and the GOAT Mike Ryan. But having said that, to being around the Miami Heat atmosphere and like you're there, we as Knicks fans, like we're there for tip-off. Like the most important thing today is the game. And then the late arriving crowd down in Miami is like, oh, we know the Heat will
embarrassing.
It's embarrassing, the opening tip-off crowd. However, as a franchise, though, this series has just continued to remind me how much institutional stability matters. And while the Knicks have started to build that this year, and, you know, the Cavs series just cannot be forgotten in the context of this series. Like, that was a team that was top 10 in net rating, top 10 in offense, top 10 in defense. And the Knicks wiped the floor with them. They made the all-in move that the Knicks didn't make. And so the Knicks are able to look back on this season and say they took care of that team. And the team it looks like they're going to be eliminated by, again, still 3 games left to play, or potentially 3 games left to play, has the stability and the playoff experience. They have the coach. They have the number one guy that we don't have yet. You know, and look, I'm not even like the biggest Tibbs doubter, and I'm a big fan of Jalen Brunson. Their coach and their best player are better, and it's a reality that we all just kind of have to face, and it's probably what I'm wrestling with today. However, there is another gigantic element to this that I think is going to be the talking point. Like, as much as Tibbs is going to get some smoke for how the starting lineup change affected the rest of the team, and how he defended Jimmy Butler throughout the series, like, that's going to get some focus. But Julius Randle, the last 2 games, just any goodwill that he built up throughout this season, even like through game 2, it almost feels like it's been washed away. And it's funny, he had 20 points on 13 shots. Like, he was trying to make good passes at times, and yet the first quarter effort that we saw, there's a thread going around of his lack of closing out on defense, on jump shots, on Kevin Love, on Max Strus. Has a turnover and then doesn't even bother getting back in the play. The pick 6 that he threw to where Jalen Brunson is hustling back for a 3-on-1, and then Brunson actually gets a stop, and then Julius Randle kind of slowly ends up into the picture at the very end. The effort just not being there to then follow it up with his post-game quote, whether he didn't mean it that way or not, you just cannot say. Maybe they wanted it more, and that maybe some we have to, figure out if we want to keep this season going. The lack of self-awareness there is frustrating. And now it's suddenly become exactly where we were at the end of last season. Like, what do you do with Julius Randle? Can you keep him as one of your core pieces if you're trying to go past the second round of the playoffs? Where are you on Julius Randle? Where are you when it comes to him long term, and just like your emotions? Like, were you ever on the Julius Randle bandwagon?
I would say the Julius Randle experience has kind of been like a roller coaster. He starts off, you're kind of unsure of his potential. Then he has the All NBA type season in 2021, or the All-Star season in 21. You're riding that high. 22 happens and he kind of crashes down, and you're left wondering, like, what the heck is going on? They bring in Brunson, and they both look like all-stars. I think Brunson is the better team, the better player, the better teammate, the bigger impact on this team. Like, if I had an All-NBA vote, I would have a hard time leaving Jalen Brunson off. I would have a hard time leaving him off an All-Star ballot. But I understand why Julius Randle still made the All-Star. He put up great regular season numbers, and I think you said it best, where he built the trust with the fan base and the excitement with the fan base that maybe they did have a cornerstone guy. He's probably never going to be a one. Well, he's never going to be a one on a championship contending team, but he could be a 2-3, whether you look at Brunson as a 2 or Randle as a 2. I think those are pretty interchangeable, but I think there's more consensus that you can win with Brunson as your 2 compared to Randle. But yeah, just being in the Kasai Center, Miami-Dade Arena, whatever they call it. The one play that really stuck out to me was the one you mentioned, the 3-on-1. Brunson hustles back, stops Gabe Vincent going up for a layup, and you could just see Julius Randle just walking up the court, and you can't be the guy who walks up the court and then in the post game say they might have just wanted it more than us. Like if it was somebody like RJ Barrett, who I don't think anybody ever questions RJ Barrett's toughness and his fight, but when Randle's fight and intensity and attention to detail always comes into question, that's the part that I have a hard time stomaching. Can this guy be a franchise player? So if push came to shove, I would say I'm out on Julius Randle. Just because of that, I question, how much he loves the game of basketball from the standpoint of things like that happening in game 4. Like maybe he's not healthy. If he's not healthy, then I think he shouldn't be playing, but he looks good on the offensive end.
That's the thing. Like it's tough for me to go to the injury excuse when, like you said, he made tough shots last night. He was the exact version of the regular season Julius that we've seen all year. I thought the Heat have a really good game plan with him, forced him to take some tough shots. I liked that there was more spacing for him to get to the rim a little bit more last night, but it didn't change the fact that there was one end of the floor that it's weird. I think he was about as impactful as Brunson last night, but with Brunson, like, you don't give him a pass, but he's limited being a 6-foot guard that isn't all that quick, But with Julius, like, I don't see the effort. I see Jalen Brunson trying, and it's an inability that is lacking there. With Julius, I've seen you defend before. I've seen you play really good defense when you want to. And this just wasn't that in the biggest game of the season for the Knicks. So
yeah, he's making Max Strus and Kevin Love's first step.
Oh my gosh. That Kevin Love blow by, man, that was the moment I was like, oh, this is
in trouble.
This is very bad. Yes.
Yeah. And that was it wasn't even like an isolated like walk back instance. Like I lost count at how many times he was walking back, or he was the last guy, or he was doing the pouting, the person that put that thread together. I wanted to make sure.
Zach Blatter, yeah.
Zach Blatter from the Strickland. I mean, he gave that guy a ton of content to use because of how many times Randle was one of the last people coming into the frame. So, I think that was the most disheartening thing. That I think New York has the talent and it has the guys to contend with a team like Miami. They don't have Spo, who is probably the best coach in the NBA, and they don't have the best player in the series, Jimmy Butler. But for all the talk about the Heat culture, that was the part that was the most upsetting to me, just seeing somebody like Julius Randle kind of just get just look like he didn't want to be there. And there was a ton of Knicks fans there, and for the 2 games in Miami, they didn't really give a lot to cheer about for how many Knicks fans were there.
So you mentioned RJ Barrett, and I don't know where you were coming into the postseason, but I was wondering if we were about to watch RJ Barrett get benched early in the postseason because of how he was during the regular season. And like, shout out to our KFS pod co-host Jeremy Cohen, who has put it perfectly. Like, they got to the 5 seed largely in spite of RJ Barrett. And come postseason, when you kind of have to throw the regular season sample out, maybe he was headed for a couple of DNPs. And by game 3 of the playoffs, it actually turned out he was going to be one of their better players. They don't beat the Cavs without him. And I got to be honest, through 4 games, like a rough shooting game in game 3, but who had a good shooting game in game 3? I actually thought his process was kind of fine. And then these other games, he's been their second best player in all of these games. So it's the context of RJ Barrett, like John said it last night on the post game. I think the Knicks have found something in this guy. Now, I have no idea how the front office thinks, and the CAA influence is real. But as far as you're concerned, like, is that at least a silver lining you could take away with RJ? And I guess we're kind of burying the lead here. Where were you on RJ Barrett coming into this postseason?
Yeah, RJ's tough because it feels like you know what a player is or should be after 4 full regular seasons. But then you can throw his age into consideration, and he's still 22, turning 23 this June. So it's like, and then he shows the flashes in the Cleveland series where the biggest knock on him is just he's just an inefficient player. But then in the Cleveland series, he shoots over 50% from the field. He looks like he's starting to develop a 3-point shot. He's scoring, over 20 points per game at that level of efficiency. And it does feel like you do have something. Where I think the disconnect might be is what that something is. I don't think that something is ever going to blossom into the best player on a championship contending team, but not everybody could be the best player on a championship contending team. You do need to fill out the roster still. And I think I've seen enough from RJ Barrett to feel a certain level of optimism. And I also think he has that the intangibles you look for in a basketball player, where it's like, I know he is going to work extremely hard in the off season. I know he kind of has that, to a lesser extent. Why I love Jimmy Butler is because he has that like dog mentality, where it's probably the closest thing we've seen to somebody like the Kobe Bryants and the Michael Jordans. And I think to a lesser extent, RJ does have that similar killer instinct where he wants the ball, he wants it in his hands, he wants to be the guy on the biggest stage. Like I always think back to the draft night where you could see his appreciation of what it meant to him to be a New York Knick. So that's why I'm not. He's 23 years old. I'm not ready to give up on RJ Barrett, and I think he could be a really solid piece on a championship contending team. It just, is there a number one out there that you could realistically get?
And that has always been the defensive RJ that I've heard out. Like if the Knicks were looking elsewhere this offseason before, like, then this is like my thought, honestly, 9 games ago, that if they look elsewhere and RJ's the centerpiece of like an OG Anunoby trade or a tertiary piece like that, where you put someone that's a better defender and better shooter around RJ, then I'd understand it. But I'd have the caveat that like he's still only 22. Like, who knows what happens when he gets later on in his career. That's the defense I've always, when people have defended, that I've heard out. Now I'm at the point where I'd like to be the team that finds out what RJ is if he's still here, like, and that's where, man, I'm really hoping that the majority of Knicks fans are able to take a step back and find the positives. I know it's disappointing today. I know what the last like week has been is just agita and agony over the fact that a team you are allegedly better than is up 3-1 against you. But like the getting this version of RJ and seeing what it's like when the games matter the most, when he's going through his rough shooting slumps next season, because they're going to happen when he's having like those 2 for 12, the casual crew calls them tour dates during the season. We can look back and be like, well, like we have playoff Julius, we have playoff RJ to look at and say that he could be that player. And, that's, I don't say it's given him a pass for any slumps he has in the future, but it's given us something to hold on to that's in there, and we're willing to be more patient. And ironically, it's gone the exact opposite now with Julius. If he has another all NBA season for the Knicks next year, I think I know this fan base enough to be like, yeah, they're all going to say, oh, well, like, who cares? This is empty regular season stats. What'd you do in the postseason? And, here we are.
Yeah, my bigger question is, do you think RJ and Julius, the way they kind of play, can coexist?
That's been the number one question.
Yeah,
it's been the number one question for the last couple of years. I think they need more shooting. Whether you use Julius to get it, whether you use RJ to get it, and I can't believe we're saying this after how the Cavs series went. If you use the Mitch position, where you need someone that is a shooter at the center position, I don't know where you are able to find that. There's this pipe dream of a Porzingis reunion that I'm just not ready to entertain just yet. But you need to have more shooting on the floor, because I know Julius tried to fill that gap this year, not necessarily with efficiency, but with volume. So like him taking as many threes was like part of the plan. But yeah, I've always been hesitant about the RJ Julius pairing. Having said all of this, like, I gotta think, as much as it doesn't feel like the regular season matters now, that the front office is thinking about what this team was from December 4th on, and especially from the Josh Hart trade on. And they're wondering if the significant, like, franchise altering upgrade isn't there. Maybe we just run it back. I don't know. What would not to, I hesitate to talk about the offseason because the series is not over, but in your mind, if you had the choice of like Zach LaVine is the trade that to go get, or like Karl Anthony Towns is the trade. I see you're already shaking your head. No, like you just run it back is my thought. Can you just run it back and be okay?
I would rather run it back than go out and get a Zach LaVine or a Karl Anthony Towns. Karl Anthony Towns is just like, it just does not move the needle in the slightest. I think there's maturity questions about him. He was kind of at the forefront of the Jimmy Butler problems in Minnesota, similar to Ben Simmons being the problem with Jimmy Butler in Philadelphia. And then all of a sudden it turns out, hey, maybe Jimmy is just a really great competitor and those guys were the problem. And then LaVine with his knee issues and just his age, it just really doesn't, I don't think it should really excite Knicks fans. And then I think it kind of turns to like, where else do you look? Like, is a Bradley Beal an option? I don't think Bradley Beal would be that big of a needle mover. And then it kind of turns to like the pipe dreams. Does Giannis force his way out? Which I don't really see happening. But if Drew retires at the end of his contract and Middleton gets up there, or my ideal pipe dream would be Philly crashes out to Boston in their series,
where we've all been for a couple of weeks, man. I hear where you're going with this.
James Harden goes to Houston, does whatever, and Embiid's looking around like, hey, I kind of want out. Joel Embiid at the 5, I think would be my ideal. Because if you look at like, the goal should be championships. I know the Knicks haven't got to the Eastern Conference Finals in a while, but to be a championship contending team, outside of the Pistons, probably, you have a top 10 player, and you have to look at what top 10 players would be the most likely to become available. And Luka would be kind of awesome, but you kind of already saw the Luka and Jalen pairing in Dallas. But Embiid for me would be the pipe dream.
So 2 things on that. First of all, the Embiid pipe dream has been our pipe dream as well at Knicks Film School for months. That's the moment that Christmas Day, when it was rumored that Harden might go back to Houston. It was like, all right, we'll play out the rest of that scenario and what might happen. And I had one of the guys from the Rights to Ricky Sanchez pod on the pregame pod when the Knicks played the Sixers earlier this year. And I mentioned, like, this is our pipe dream. I recognize it's a pipe dream, but like, I say that, what do you think? And he said, like, if James were to leave and Joel were to want out, I can't blame him. Like, we did every version of this team that we could, whether it was with Ben Simmons, whether it was with Jimmy Butler, whether it was with James Harden. Like, at a certain point, you have to accept that it maybe isn't going to happen here. I mean, if you want to go that far, you can. I doubt the Rights to Ricky Sanchez guys would say that, but I mean, I wouldn't push back on that conclusion. Point being, that I think is the only scenario. I'm not entertaining a Giannis situation. I'm just, shout out Brian Windhorst. I don't think he said that unintentionally. I'm not even having the Giannis conversation. The Embiid thing, I think, could actually be more realistic, especially it's going to become my emphasis when it comes to talking about this. It's been Jeremy Cohen, who kind of plans out the offseason content for us. He looks to the CAA connections, and Leon Rose's former client is Joel Embiid. So that has to matter in this situation. So we've been doing this thing called the blame pie, where you it's a pie chart, and you chart out how much blame you're giving to each spot. And before I let you get out of here, and I have just a couple questions after. We'll do the blame pie, and then one other thing before I let you go. How would you chart out the blame for being down 3-1? And I'm not saying for the Knicks series loss, because again, it's not over. They could win tonight, and then we're back on the irrational bandwagon for Friday. But for the blame pie is concerned, how would you separate or divide up the slices of this?
Okay. I'm going majority to Tibbs.
Okay.
Like I'm going 60%.
60%. Wow. Yeah. Why?
It just feels like, again, I think I truly believe Spo is one of the best coaches in the NBA, and especially best in-game adjusters, where Tibbs, it feels like the adjustments come game to game.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is, like, once a game kind of gets out of reach, it feels like Spo just keeps pulling away, and the Knicks just don't have a response to what they're doing. And it's like, hey, let's just pack it in and try again next week when we can figure out some more adjustments. And then you've had like the starting lineup that got them there of Grimes and Brunson, Barrett, Randle, Robinson. That was the lineup that started the most games, and up until game 4, those 5 had played 0 minutes together, which seems almost impossible to fathom. And Grimes comes in, and you see the impact he has when the Heat have to respect his shooting, and he comes out. I think he started probably like 3 or 4 from 3. Questions on the defensive end and the rebounding, but what this team needs right now is shooting to open up the floor for guys like Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle. So I would go Tibbs 60. I would go lack of shooting 30.
Okay.
Because I
90% now. Okay.
Yeah, I think there is a ton of space. I don't think there's a ton of space for Jalen Brunson to operate and Julius Randle to operate. And you see these clips when they're coming out after, like Jimmy Butler is just, he's just freelancing in the middle of the paint, 2 feet in the paint, looking to help off RJ Barrett or looking to help off Josh Hart. And there's just no respect for those guys and their ability to stretch the floor. And then I think I'll go 10% to the front court. I think Randle has had his ups and downs. Mitchell Robinson, who dominated the Cleveland front court of Evan Mobley and Jared Allen, and it was like, oh my God, like Mitchell Robinson completely changes the Knicks' trajectory and their potential for how far they could go in a playoff run. And he's kind of regressed back to not what he was in the Cleveland series and being able to carry them. And then I want to, when I say the front court, I want to exclude Hartenstein, because he is out there battling and hustling and just showing a ton of heart out there. But like Obi Toppin, he comes in and it feels like he doesn't understand why he's so open and why the Heat are just not guarding him, and he comes in and he's shooting it a ton. I think game 1 he was like 4 of 11, which isn't
4 of 11.
Yeah, which isn't a bad shooting game for Obi, but the Heat want him to take 11 threes a game. And it just doesn't feel like they're playing, like the Knicks have like a game plan around him, and his development seems to have gotten kind of stagnant, and there isn't a ton of improvement to say, when extension talks do come on the table, like what are they going to do? It feels like at this point, just let him go his separate way and the Knicks go their way. So, and that kind of plays into why 60% is on Tibbs, because it doesn't feel like this team really has an offensive identity in this Miami series, and especially on the defensive end. lost count at how many times they've lost where Strus is or Vincent or Duncan Robinson, and the actions that Miami is running. Miami is getting any look that they want. And the Knicks, it's like pulling teeth watching their offense at times. And another reason why it's probably 60% Tibbs, it feels like the doubles that they're sending at Jimmy Butler are so not effective. And he's
cooking them on these doubles throughout this entire series.
I think I saw a stat where like 52 points from game 4 came off of Butler attempted doubles, where it's like they double, he finds one person, that person swings it to Max Strus, and it's a 3. And then the Knicks come down, and it's like a Randle step back with 18 seconds on the shot clock. And that's kind of been what this series has been through 4 games.
So I'm going to take your pie real quick, and I'm going to push back a little bit, but I want to add 2 more slices to it, because I've got smoke for Tibbs. I also wasn't a fan of the starting lineup change. I will say, just going by some lineup data, that starting 5 has a offensive rating of 120.6. The offense hasn't necessarily been the problem. I think the beginning of game 3 is really what we're all pointing to as like, holy crap, that didn't work. The defense, ironically, has been the thing that's been the most awful part. It's a 129.5 defensive rating, that starting 5, which like that's a negative 8.8 net rating for that starting 5. So whether we all kind of focused on how poor the spacing was and that being the issue, ironically, if that lineup was meant to create a better defense, it didn't. So I'm here for the criticism of the starting lineup change, especially going to last night. Offense was worse, defense was better, which is the weird part about this series, that lineup of Randle, Barrett, Brunson, Grimes, and Mitch ends up with a 100 offensive rating and a 96 defensive rating, which would be the best in the sport by far. So I got smoke for Tibbs there. The defensive strategy on Jimmy, Benji's been saying it. Our main X's and O's guy, and honestly, both of our X's and O's guys. In fact, I'll just say it. Our entire team has been saying, like, make Jimmy Butler be great. You know, like, don't let him be spectacular first before you dedicate so much attention. I get it. If you're going to choose, let Jimmy Butler beat you or Max Strus, your inclination is like, well, okay, make Max Strus beat you. Well, guess what? Max Strus is beating you this far into the series. So I've got smoke for him there. I do think he's been outcoached. I do think like a large piece of the pie, like half of Tibbs' pie, like I'll go 30% Tibbs and then 30% Julius Randle. Because at a certain point, I can't put it all on the coach when your all-star, all-NBA player just hasn't lived up to that type of reputation. You know, you need to depend on your stars in a playoff series, and he's been undependable, and that's the frustrating part. You were able to get away with it against a undisciplined, inexperienced team like the Cavs, but then when you get to a series like the Heat, you can't make as many mistakes. You need your guys to show up, and here we are. The Julius Randle, outside of one game, really didn't show up. And I believe that's a equally as significant piece of the pie to Tibbs. What say you?
I agree. Okay. I think Randle has shown tendencies outside of the fact that the looks he does generate are normally pretty tough looks, and there's nothing easy about the looks that he gets. But I do think he shows tendencies where you're like, this guy cannot be counted on. And I think to a lesser extent, Bam has kind of shown that for Miami, where it's like some of the numbers at times can feel hollow, where you're like, this guy is like a borderline all-star, but needs somebody like Butler to elevate. And I think that Randle can be that, but Randle doesn't have the luxury of having somebody like Jimmy Butler with him. So that's probably why I give a little more of a pass to somebody like Julius Randle. But I do agree with the larger point that for this Knicks team to to kind of reach their ceiling as a team, that Randle has to be a lot better and take a lot more accountability for this team's success.
That game 3, like the offensive game plan wasn't working. That's when you needed your all-star, your all-NBA guy to be like, all right, I'm getting 35 this game. And he got 13. So I guess he got 15, but still, like, he didn't get enough. This is a night where we needed his offense and it wasn't there. Again, he may not be playing 100%. Guess who also wasn't playing 100%? Jalen Brunson, and the guy carried them in the fourth quarter, giving them a pulse down the stretch. The only other thing I'd push back on is there's just like, I'm not sure what my full chart ends up looking like. There's like a 25 to 30% slice. That's just admiring what the Miami Heat have done. They've gotten the Knicks to play outside of themselves through 4 games. They are forcing the Knicks to become a jump shooting team in that way that might contribute to shooting, but it also, like, I don't think the Knicks had a second gear all season. This is how they've been all season. The team that lacks shooting. I'm not sure more ball movement would even fix that. Now I've heard it all season that people doubt the Knicks offense, but the moment that the Heat were able to take away the Knicks winning the battle of the boards, it became, all right, a 3-point shooting contest, as XJ would call it. So I want to give credit to the Heat in that sense. So while I have more slices there, I think we do have the same people on the blame pie, or the credit pie, I guess it would be, with the Miami Heat, with adding the Heat to the end of it. That's at least where I would go to with this. That's where I would at the end of it.
Yeah, and the Heat do such a good job of just dragging you out into the deep water and forcing you to try to tread water.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like a boxer where it's like they'll hit you hard with a body shot in the first round and see that kind of weakens you. And then for the next 11 rounds, the only thing they throw are body shots at that one area the entire time, where it's like they know where this Knicks team's weakness is, and they're going to make you play into those and beat you, where it's like the Knicks are like, hey, let's try to have Max Strus beat us. But if Max Strus is just shooting uncontested looks off whatever actions they're running, that's a lot better of a game plan than, let's try to bait RJ Barrett and Obi Toppin and Josh Hart into shooting these contested looks and getting the ball out of Jalen Brunson's hand. So I do think you do have to give credit to what Miami has been able to do. And you look at it, Spoelstra's had 2 losing seasons in 15 years and in 2 championships. It's like, yeah, no surprise that they're here with what they have.
And look, add Jalen Brunson to that list. Other than game 2 where he had 6 threes, he's 2 of 19 in the 3 losses from 3-point range. Like, he's not getting their best of looks either. I'm not even like criticizing JB there. I'm more giving the Heat credit for how they've forced the Knicks to not be able to play their style of basketball this year. So yeah, I think it's just acknowledging that the opponent has done to us what we did to Cleveland one round previous. Last question. Speaking of the Miami Heat, now I know that this is much different for you than it is for me, because you're in it, you're down there. You're gonna have to deal with this if the Knicks lose this series significantly more awfully than I will up here in New York. But going forward, I was talking to XJ last night before the post game, and I was saying, like, what we kind of need now is the Heat to get to the finals. So that way this validates the Knicks loss. You can then look at it like, oh, you know what? The Heat found another gear. They reclaimed the form of the team that got to the conference finals and was a shot away from the finals last year. Like, this is this is just their year. And we're a chapter of a Cinderella story. And he was like, I would hate that. And I remembered he lives in Florida. So I ask you now, is it more beneficial to the Knicks overall narrative if you lose to a Heat team that gets to the finals and, like, it's clear that they're able to beat not just the Bucks, not just the Knicks, but also either the Celtics or the Sixers? Or are you just like, no, I need the Sixers or Celtics to wipe the floor with them in the next round if they are to get to the next round?
Yeah, I need Miami out of the playoffs this year. Yeah.
That's both personal and professional purposes.
Personally, I need Miami out as soon as possible. 4 games in the next round would be better. Actually, the best case is the Knicks win the next 3. I'm not giving up hope.
There you go.
But I think the narrative from like players around the league is that this Knicks organization was such a mess and such the punchline, the joke, whatever. And Jalen Brunson, I think, has done a good enough job to kind of stabilize the franchise and show people that, like, no, we can build a winner here. Like, it's not some impossible task under this management. And I think because of that alone, it doesn't matter how far this Miami team goes. But selfishly, I do want them out as quickly as possible. The quicker, the better.
For your sake and for my sake, I also hope they're out as quickly as possible, which is 3 games from now, if I can be completely honest. Realistic, I have no idea.
2 in the Garden.
I hear you. They beat Miami in Miami. The Julius Randle shot.
I was there.
Dude, that's the most unfortunate part for me. That night was such a okay, all is forgiven, Julius. And I feel like it's all gone now. That shot is now a distant memory for all Knicks fans. And
I'm hanging my hat on moments like that.
Mm-hmm.
The OT win against the Celtics. Like, this team has a tendency to prove you wrong when you're the most down on them.
That's why I thought they were winning last night, man. Every time they've needed to win a game this year, they've won it.
They're like 22-10 or something like that since the Josh Hart trade. Like, this team isn't some massive underdog. And again, 2 games at the Garden. That's what I'm really banking on and hoping for.
Well,
as I'm saying it, I'm trying to talk myself into it more.
Listen, we're all might need to talk me into it more, especially with Mitch tweeting and Julius doing press conferences. I'm at the point where
we have to get Mitch off social media,
just forever.
Twitter,
put the phone away,
the Snapchat stories. It's just no good can come from it, and I don't know.
Thankfully, I'm pretty sure Tibbs doesn't have the internet on his phone, so he doesn't see any of this.
Yeah.
But for the rest of us that have to form content and narratives around this stuff, it would be much more beneficial if you did not use the internet, Mitchell Robinson. Taylor, you've been outstanding. Thank you so much for joining me. For those who do not know where to find you, please plug where they can find you and all of your work.
You can follow me on Twitter at @Vippolis, and then you can just follow the Dan Le Batard show. It's going to be a lot of Miami talk, but hopefully I just keep kind of finding ways to show people that people on the show know about sports and that we can talk more New York sports, because nobody else will. And if it doesn't happen there, I'll just start my own podcast where I can kind of talk Knicks.
I said this to I don't know if it was to Taché or to Giancarlo of the Miami Heat beat, but like, the whole "you don't get the show" sound liner from Poppy, mine would be like, "you don't get the Knicks," because like the lack of intelligent Knicks talk is just so prominent, which is why I appreciated Knicks tape talk when it popped up on the Le Batard show feed. It was like, oh, someone who gets the Knicks.
Yeah,
I get it. Like, to the Dan
called
thing,
it awful analysis. I was like,
of course it is, because it's good analysis. How dare you do good analysis on their feed? We can't have that, So I say this personally. A lot of the tips I take as a executive producer from Mike Ryan. I admire what Dan has done in the community and as a show. I just wish the Knicks talk was a little more intelligent, but that also might not be me getting the show. However,
I'll start asking Meadowlark to give me a Knicks tape talk podcast.
Perfect. And where one of the first subscribers will be.
Yeah.
Taylor, thank you for joining me, man.
Thank you so much. Love what you guys do.